The first step before starting the installation process is going to be to remove the negative battery cable from the battery. We're going to use a 10mm socket or open-end wrench for that, and then just set that cable aside. That'll ensure power is off to the vehicle. To begin the installation process inside the vehicle, we're going to need to remove these two trim panels on either side of the factory screen. They're going to come off in two pieces. We start by removing this one here. Make sure all the clips are still intact and set it aside. To remove the secondary trim panel here, we need to loosen and remove this 10mm bolt. With the bolt out, set it in a safe place. We can now firmly grip the trim panel and pop it loose. Once again, verify all your clips are intact and set it aside. We will now repeat the process on the driver's side. We'll start by removing that inner trim panel and set it aside. Once again, we're going to have a 10mm bolt to remove right there. With the 10mm bolt removed, we can now remove the larger trim panel. On this one, we will need to disconnect the start-stop button right here. This trim panel will set aside. With the side trim removed, we'll proceed to the next step, which is to remove the 10mm bolt on either side of the central control unit. We're using an extension here, and we're going to go ahead and loosen both of these bolts. As the bolt starts to come out, just grab it to make sure you don't drop it down into the cavity. We'll set both of those in a safe place. We will reach down and pop loose this lower trim panel. You can set this aside. We will move to the top and begin removing the panels above the screen. Insert a credit card in the lip between this speaker style panel and the dash and press up firmly from one side. Then you can reach over and pop it loose. There will be a single wiring harness to disconnect under this panel. With that harness disconnected, make sure all your clips are in place and you can set the panel aside. The next step, we will remove the two air vents and their surrounding trim assembly on either side of the center screen. Take a credit card and insert it between the gap of the air vent trim and the dash and start applying forward pressure. Reach into the air vent and pull it forward. The air vent will come free and you can set it aside. We will now repeat this process on the other side. The key is to take your credit card and insert it and run it down the side to break the air vent loose from the plastic, and then you can simply pull it out. We will remove the two 10mm bolts on either side of the factory screen. Once again, set these bolts in a safe place. After the two lower bolts are removed, we will remove the two bolts above the factory screen. We are now removing the two bolts on the top of the factory screen. With the four bolts removed, now grip the screen on either side. Gently work it back and forth. and free the screen from the factory assembly. We're going to disconnect these 4 harnesses. Now all of these harnesses only fit in one way, so you can take a picture of them if you'd like, but don't worry about mixing them up. Now set this screen in a safe place where you won't let it get scratched. With the factory screen removed, we have now exposed the final 2 bolts above the center control unit. Once again, all these bolts are 10mm, and we'll use the extension with our 10mm socket to remove them. With all the bolts removed, we've covered the gear shift with an old sweatshirt. We're going to grab the center control unit from the sides and we'll work it free. Now you can set the center control unit here. We're going to show you the wiring on the new interface that we're going to install behind this unit. Here we have the Hamilton Motor Company Apple CarPlay upgrade interface. This device is going to come built in with both Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Both are wired and wireless. You can see some of the things that set ours aside. We have a really high quality heat sink here. And what that means is if you live in the States or in the South, we're here in North Carolina, in a warmer climate, this unit's going to dissipate heat really well in the summertime. These dip switches here are going to come preset from the factory. You will not need to change any of these. I'm going to chat you through the wiring, what it does, how to install it. For most folks, we're not going to be including anything here. This is your HDMI port. If your LC200 is equipped with rear screens in the back for people to watch movies, and you want that to have Apple CarPlay functionality, just let us know. We'll get you an HDMI cable that you can use to plug this into your factory system. Most folks don't have those rear screens, but if you do, we'll hook you up. Here's the first harness that we're going to install. It's pretty straightforward. It's going to have these T's, and what we're doing is we're jumping in place or in between the factory wiring so that our unit can gather information. So we're going to have these 2 T's. This is going to plug in place of your main connector. This is going to plug in place of one of your audio connectors. The next harness, this one here, looks a lot more complicated than it is. This is going to plug into the back of our unit, and this is going to plug into the other part of our harness, this harness here, for your microphone. So this will connect to our harness. These are going to be unused. This would be for a SIM card in the future. That's not something that is currently available. And then here is going to be your USB port. We're going to drop this in the glove box in this car. This is for your wired Apple CarPlay or wired Android Auto. It'll also charge your phone. Here is a small adapter wire. It's going to plug in behind your unit here. Once again, jumping in between to your factory wires. And it's going to plug into the back of our interface box. Finally, we get a ton of questions about this speaker. People want to know what it is. This speaker allows our unit to do something fairly special. If you're listening to factory XM radio and you want navigation to be able to mix in with your XM radio, this speaker installs behind your center control unit here, and it will allow Waze, Apple Maps, or Google Maps to talk and mix it in with your XM radio. There's no other way to do that other than adding a little auxiliary speaker like this. XM radio, FM radio, and AM radio all operate on their own audio channels for the vehicle, so we can't mix in our sound unless you install this auxiliary speaker. Now, if you don't want to use this, many folks don't, or if you don't listen to XM radio at all and you just want to use Apple CarPlay with Apple Music or Spotify or SoundCloud, you certainly don't need to install this speaker, so it is optional. We're going to begin with this main connector here. Reach down in your fingernail, click here, and pull this gray bar back. Once it is back, you can slide this connector out. We're going to plug it into our corresponding large connector here and seat that gray connector. This one is a duplicate of your factory wire, and it'll plug right back in place. The next wire we're going to connect is this one labeled for audio right here. This will plug into our adapter, and our wire will plug right back in here. So we have these two T's, this main one here, and then the smaller one is labeled for HU audio. These harnesses are like a jigsaw puzzle. They will only go together one way, so you will not risk accidentally connecting the wrong port. The final harness we're going to connect is this green one. There's a green plug at the bottom of your radio. We'll disconnect it. Ours will plug in place, and we will now connect our male adapter into the bottom of the central control unit. Push it in until you hear it click. Small RCA looking connector from the main wiring harness we just installed is going to plug into the corresponding female connector, both of them labeled mic, both of them black, on this harness. We recommend usually covering this in a little bit of electrical tape or duct tape just so they don't come apart as you're putting the vehicle back together. Small speaker will connect into the wire coming off of the primary harness we have here. We are now ready to begin making all the final connections into the interface box. This USB port, you can run it through your cavity and drop it into your glove box. You may need to drill a small hole in your glove box, or you can pinch it between one of the access panels. Other folks, they like to drop it down below their center console. So this is something that's really a matter of personal preference. There's a lot of creative things you can do with it. Some folks even go on Amazon and order an adapter and create a mounted USB port somewhere on their dash or somewhere in their center console. So we leave that open to you. We are now ready to plug everything into the interface box. This accessory harness will have 3 unused wires, the 2 yellow RCAs, and the wire labeled UART will not be used. This medium-sized connector will plug into its corresponding slot on the interface box. Once again, this is like a jigsaw puzzle. These things will only plug in one way, so you do not risk mixing anything up. The large wiring connector from the primary wiring harness will plug into the large slot on the back of the interface. The green adapter wire had both a magenta and blue adapter coming off of it, and these will plug into the back of the new interface. These adapters will only plug in one way. Finally, we include a small GPS antenna. This is for things like weather apps or to set the factory clock on our system. This will connect onto its navy blue connector. With everything here, we are now ready to begin tucking the interface box back into your system. Just wiring the unit outside of the cavity here so that you could get a better picture. When you're ready to install it, we recommend wiring it up here in this upper cavity, where there will be plenty of room to tuck it away along with the excess cable connectors. This will be behind your factory screen. We will now begin reinstalling the center control unit. We are reinstalling the screws above the center control unit. This for your USB port is to run it through this channel right here, and you can drop it down however much slack you would like below your central control unit. Once you reinstall the other trim panel, it'll sit back here very nicely. You don't have to drill any holes for this. We're now going to reinstall these 10mm bolts on either side of the central control unit here. And we will repeat this process on the driver's side. These bolts are going into plastic, so there's no need to over-tighten them. We are now going to reinstall the factory screen. One of the big misconceptions is that any of our wires need to connect back here. That's not the case. All of our new connections are going to be made in that lower central control unit, and the only reason that we removed these wires was to make room so we could remove the factory screen. With those 4 connected, we will turn the factory screen around and gently set it back into its place. It'll snap in. And we will repeat the process on the driver's side. Be a little bit careful when you're doing this, not to drop the bolts into the cavity. We have folks from time to time, they'll reach out and say they dropped the bolts. If you do drop the bolts, it is not a big deal at all. The bolt will settle somewhere, you won't hear it rattle, and this screen has more than enough support from these other bolts. You will not notice any imperfections if you were missing 1 or 2 bolts. We are now installing the bolts on the top of the factory head unit. With the factory screen reinstalled, we can reinstall the air vents on either side. Simply line them up in their sockets and push them into place. We will do the passenger side air vent as well. Line it up in its socket and push it into place. With both air vents reconnected, we can reconnect this speaker panel up here. Don't forget to plug in the piece of the alarm system at the top here. We will align this panel into its socket, and you can clip that one into place as well. Take this lower trim panel, line it up in its socket, and click it into place. Make sure your USB port for the wired Apple CarPlay comes up. Reconnect the push to start button here, then line this panel up in its socket and push it into place. We'll repeat this on the passenger side. Line the passenger panel up and push it into place. Reinstall the 10mm bolt holding the side trim panel on. And with that complete, you can put the finishing panel in its socket and snap it into place. We will repeat that on the driver's side, and the installation is complete. With everything reinstalled, we've got Apple CarPlay running here. As you can see, it looks absolutely terrific. We recommend, as a final measure, checking all of your features, including making sure your backup camera works and returns to CarPlay, and making sure all your steering wheel controls work. With that, the installation is complete. If you need any help, you can reach our tech support team anytime, Monday through Friday, or by email on the weekends at 919-858-2890, and we're here to help.